was 3 years old, November cold. Mama washing clothes, then the world broke loose. Radio crying, mama on her knees. Kennedy gone, I didn't know what it meant, but I knew what grief looked like. My sister just born, life starting new. My brother shook nights no one could undo. They called him limited, you called it done. I told him I'd make him well someday. I meant every word I said, but promises don't stop time, and love don't always win the fight. Still somehow through the losses and breaks, I'm still standing when it counts. I've carried a weight you couldn't see long before it ever showed on me. From a boy who hoped to a man who tried to fix the world from the inside. I've fallen hard, I've stood back up. I've lost a lot, but I'm still here enough, and I wear that belt to remind myself where I've been and why I live. I grew up here.
Here I'm thinking everybody's hearing me, and they are not. All right. So welcome to the Kilz Health live stream with Dr. Nelson. I am your host, Dr. Nelson, and I cut the intro short because I want to have more time with Dr. Cate Shanahan here. Welcome, everyone. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And hello, Jerry and Thomas. Carnivore Teacher Alpha, hello. And everybody who is watching, welcome. I'm going to start by playing a little video that we made for today's live stream, and then we're going to talk to Dr. Shanahan. Where are you coming from today, by the way, Dr. Shanahan? Where are you?
I'm in just north of Orlando, Florida.
Okay. All righty. I am in West Volusia County, so we're pretty close.
Yeah. Neighbors.
All right. Let's play this first, and then we talk.
Modern medicine typically manages obesity, fatty liver, and diabetes as distinct pathologies, assigning each a separate specialist and a different prescription. Clinical evidence suggests these are actually downstream symptoms of a singular cellular disruption caused by an environmental variable. This chart tracks the consumption of industrial seed oils in the human diet. Since the 1900s, the curve shows a steep, sustained climb into the present day. When we overlay the incidence of modern metabolic diseases, the two data lines mirror each other almost perfectly. Determining if this is a direct biomechanical link rather than a simple correlation requires identifying a specific mechanism within the cell. Seed oils act as toxic chemical signals, disrupting systemic biological function at the cellular level. Dr. Cate Shanahan, a board-certified physician, identified this mechanism through her work as a clinical researcher. Her research began at Cornell University, where she studied biology before pursuing her medical degree. She spent 20 years as an academic lipid researcher, investigating the root causes of metabolic dysfunction. This work formed the basis of her foundational book, Deep Nutrition, and the framework detailed in her latest work, Dark Calories. Her thesis argues that industrial lipids provide the chemical signals that alter human genetic expression. Dr. Shanahan's clinical observations began in Hawaii, which served as a unique, isolated environment for metabolic study. She treated an older generation of patients who grew up on traditional, locally sourced diets and maintained robust metabolic health well into old age. In contrast, the younger generation in the same community suffered from an unprecedented epidemic of obesity and diabetes. The primary independent variable was the total replacement of traditional food with highly processed modern diets. This disparity prompted a shift in her practice, from managing symptoms to investigating the intersection of evolutionary biology and genetics. Because human genetics do not change in a single generation, the cause had to be the shifting nutritional inputs signaling those genes. To find that cause, we have to look at the micro-level interactions between human cells and dietary lipids. A healthy cell membrane requires stable lipids to maintain structural integrity. Industrial seed oils are highly unstable, oxidized lipids. When these unstable lipids are incorporated into the cellular architecture, they cause structural warping and physical gaps in the membrane. These gaps trigger persistent cellular distress signals, leading to a state of systemic chronic inflammation. This inflammation provides the biological environment for conditions like fatty liver and insulin resistance, and is linked to neurological disruptions in mental illness and autism. These toxic signals also drive epigenetic changes, altering the way the cell reads and expresses its own DNA. Seed oils provide corrupted data to the cell, replacing the ancestral instructions the human body evolved to process. Validating this theory requires observing if cellular health can be restored once the toxic signal is removed. Dr. Shanahan applied this principle as the director of the Los Angeles Lakers Pro Nutrition Program. She required the athletes to strictly eliminate all processed foods and industrial seed oils. Clinical testing showed a rapid reduction in the players' systemic inflammation markers. This resulted in optimized on-court performance and significantly faster recovery times after games. Removing toxic lipid signals allows the body to restore metabolic flexibility, even under the high physical stress of professional sports. Correcting gene expression requires replacing industrial fats with the signals the body expects. Dr. Shanahan calls this ancestral human nutrition, which she organizes into the 4 pillars of world cuisine. Pillar 1 is meat on the bone, providing the specific proteins and stable fats needed for cellular repair. Pillar 2 includes fermented and sprouted foods, which support the signaling pathways of the gut microbiome. The final pillars consist of organs and offal, alongside fresh plant and animal products. These pillars represent the biochemical baseline human DNA requires to maintain health and stop the progression of chronic disease. Transitioning to an ancestral diet is often viewed as a complication for modern life, but the trade-off is measurable. Swapping processed foods for nutrient-dense whole foods reduces the long-term costs of medical bills and chronic illness management. Dr. Shanahan's online course at drcate.com provides a guide for establishing these habits sustainably. This masterclass was presented by the Kilz Health Livestream and metabolic health practitioner Nelson Vasquez, MD. Metabolic health depends on the biological signals we send to our genes.
All righty.
That was cool. I like that. Nice job.
Thank you. All right. So, Dr. Cate Shanahan, board certified family physician. And are you a family physician? I got that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I am partial to family physicians because I am a residency trained family physician.
Awesome.
Former LA Lakers nutrition consultant and New York Times best-selling author. We're diving into her explosive new book, a couple of years now, but Dark Calories, to expose the toxic truth about industrial seed oils and explore the healing power of ancestral human nutrition. We'll also chat about her new online course, which was included in that video there, designed to make real food simple and sustainable. Dr. Cate, welcome to the stream.
Thank you so much for inviting me onto this live stream. This is my first YouTube live stream. I think I've done Instagrams before, but this is a first for me. And thank you so much for having me on and creating that cool production.
Thank you for being here. So let's start with making some definitions. Most of our audience is a carnivore or keto carnivore curious audience, and other people that may be interested in finding more about that. But many people may not have heard about you. So first introduce yourself, and then we're going to get to the first question. What are seed oils, right?
Sure.
Uh,
So,
go
yeah,
ahead.
like I said, I'm a family medicine physician and I went to Cornell University for biochemistry. So I was able to combine the understanding of chemistry in our food and in our body with the medical training that I got, which once I realized I needed to do that, which is another story, and maybe I should share that real quick. But once I realized I need to do that, it just changed everything about my understanding of how to make people healthy, of nutrition specifically, because probably your audience is well aware of the fact that the idea that saturated fat is unhealthy is not founded by science, and doctors yet are still taught that today because the American Heart Association mainly supplies the supposed evidence that that creates this illusion that saturated fats cause heart disease. And right alongside that, part of the illusion is that seed oils are healthy. And when I say illusion, I mean the illusion of evidence. It's a bunch of publications. And once you understand chemistry and are skeptical of the idea that saturated fat causes heart attacks, I started to see everything that I was taught differently. And that changed the way I practiced medicine. This was way back in 2002, when I myself, like you, a lot of us have a backstory, right? Your backstory is right at your back there, literally. But my backstory is I was always kind of plagued with health problems, mostly musculoskeletal, because I really love being active outside, exercising, biking, running, hiking, swimming. And I was always getting problems that would kind of have to make me alter what I wanted to do. I would have to, so I couldn't do a 2-hour hike. I'd have to cut it down, or I'd have to swim. It was a real pain in the neck. But eventually it progressed to something that was totally different and much more serious. And that actually was the catalyst for me questioning my nutrition education. So that's the backstory, I think, that matters for this. That was all more than 20 years ago now, and I've been through the system as a patient. I understand the limitations of the medical system, thoroughly, which are tragic. And now I've been writing books to help people get healthy on their own, right? Because the medical system really isn't going to, do the long-term kind of health that we all need. And they're great for accidents and traumas. They're great for curing an infection, but for the rest of it, we're on our own. And unless we seriously take control of our health, we are unfortunately going to succumb to one chronic disease or another, because the entire healthcare industry and processed food industry are trying to feed us processed foods and then sell us drugs to treat the diseases caused by the processed foods. So I'm sure your audience is well familiar with that story. So, but you did ask for a definition of seed oils.
Just a comment about the processed foods, and we promote a specific way of eating. Me personally, because it has helped me reverse many chronic diseases, and many here do the same. But do you think that if we just eliminated processed foods, which is like 90% of the stuff in the supermarket, right? Would we make an impact on people's health, on the population at large?
Absolutely. But in order to eliminate processed foods, if you eliminate processed foods, you can pretty much reverse all of your metabolic diseases. You can't reverse some of the things that happened before you were born to disrupt development, some of the genetic damage that we've suffered. But the vast majority of diseases that people go to the doctor for, that people take drugs for every day, heart attacks, dementia, cancers, autoimmune disease, gut problems, brain dysfunction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The vast majority are going to be completely reversed, potentially, or at least incredibly improved. And often you can get off medications and, love life a lot more, live a better life. But Dr. Nelson, one thing that I found super important in this whole conversation is to be crystal clear about what do we mean when we say processed food? Because if you ask, depending who you ask, you might find that people say ground beef is a processed food. And I think most of us would question that. Like, why is meat?
Well, it is a minimally processed food. Definitely.
Yes, but should it be called that? Like, that is correct. Yeah. They do call it, but I totally, I think that that is the way we categorize our food as minimally processed or highly processed or ultra processed comes from this system called the NOVA classification system that was developed in 2009 by a team in Brazil mostly. And they do not have a clear description as to how they categorized, like what was the evidence upon which they decided to call these things, essentially call them unhealthy by calling them minimally processed or more processed. There's not really any explanation. It's really just their opinions, right? And in my opinion, basically pre-chewed ground beef is not dangerous and it should not be considered a processed food at all. So in my book, Dark Calories, what I've done is I've defined what I think are the dangerous things in the food supply that make processed food unhealthy. Or as I put it, what puts the junk in junk food? Like, you know, what really puts it in junk food is the fact that most of the calories in most of our foods are coming from ingredients that themselves are highly refined and they're not nutritious. They have calories, but they have minimal nutrition. And this problem of consuming these processed ingredients is so big that the average person now is getting a full 70% of their total calories every single day from just these 3 processed ingredients that I call out in the book, Dark Calories. And seed oils are the worst of the worst.
So I interrupted you to talk about the processed foods, but let's start with continue with the definition of what are seed oils. What are you talking about when we mention seed oils?
Yeah, so actually I have some slides that are visuals that may sort of help people with these things. Are you
Go ahead, bring them up.
Okay, let's do it. So let me share my screen and try to figure out how to do this properly quickly. Okay, so you should be seeing this, by the way, I call this the fragility spiral. I'm gonna show you what is a seed oil in a second here, but this is an important concept to understand how I help people and how these processed ingredients harm us. So what happens is that somebody feels like something is wrong with their body. And they have some kind of a pain, or whether it's a physical pain caused by inflammation or some kind of an emotional, pain like anxiety, or they feel like their brain's not functioning right. And this brings them to the doctor. This pain is associated with limitation, right? So it's limiting what they can do in their lives. It's limiting their performance, limiting their function. So they go to the doctor and the doctor gives them a medication to treat the symptoms. And this is because doctors don't understand food, right? We don't understand, like we were just having this conversation about what is processed food. And right now they tell you that ground beef is basically processed food if you grind it up. But, it's steak that's ground up. How does that fundamentally make it from being a real food to a processed food? The answer is it does not do that. So because doctors don't understand what is food and what is processed food, they cannot help you with anything in terms of diet. They cannot help you with root causes. All that they can do is try and help you with some medication or other. So let's say you go in for heartburn. They'll give you a heartburn medicine. Let's say that you go in for anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder. They'll give you some kind of a medication to treat it. They're not going to link your diet to the pains and limitations that brought you there in the first place. And of course, then you feel like you are dependent on these medications. And you are, right? You start limiting yourself even further. That's why this is a spiral. So now you can't go anywhere without medications. Let's say it's asthma. Well, let's say it's your child that has asthma. Well, you're always worried about, does your child have that asthma inhaler with them, right? So then this impacts your life because you start focusing on taking these medications or going to the doctor, or you start suffering side effects of the medications. And that causes lost opportunity. You're not able to, if it's a child, maybe you're not able to go on a school trip because you forgot your asthma inhaler. Or if you've got terrible heartburn, maybe you can't enjoy pizza anymore because suddenly pizza causes heartburn. Of course, the carnivore community, you're not going to miss that pizza too much, but you get the idea, right? You're limiting your life. You maybe don't go traveling because you have too much autoimmune disease. It's causing joint pain. You can't walk well anymore. And so you can't go walking throughout Europe on a walking tour of Paris. So many things become limited in your life. And that also ultimately leads to frailty. And frailty is basically the number one cause of premature death, whether it is neurological frailty, mental frailty, physical, like musculoskeletal frailty. And all of this comes from the failure of medicine to properly identify what is a food that we should eat and what is not food, what is refined or processed, what is junk food that is going to make us sick. So that's the whole story in a nutshell, in a single slide here. And like I mentioned, the worst of the worst are the seed oils. And so I had to come up with so when I first started doing this, nobody was talking about seed oils, right? It wasn't even a term. The only term that we had that I used back then actually was vegetable oil, because vegetable oil, when you bought it in the store, it wasn't going to include olive oil. You know, when you buy vegetable oil, there's no olives in what they call vegetable oil. There's no olive oil in there. It's usually a seed oil. But that term didn't exist yet. So I was calling it vegetable oil for a long time. And then I would list out the ones that were a problem. And recently I realized I needed to come up with a catchy term so that people could understand what the bad oils are. So I call them the hateful 8 because there's 8 of them. And we need to memorize these 8. These are all seed oils. They do not come from coconut. Coconut is a fruit. Olive is a fruit. I'm sure you guys know this, but the way I call these out is there are 3 C's and 3 S's. So it's corn, canola, cottonseed, soy, sunflower, safflower. And then there's 2 more, grapeseed and rice bran. But the first of them, the 3 C's and the 3 S's, those are the ones you really need to memorize for grocery shopping, because those are the ones that end up in processed foods. And, you know, they're going to even be in things, of course, they're in mayonnaise. They're going to be in canned tuna. They're now in things like olives, which used to always be in olive oil or brine. So they're everywhere. And then the other 2, grapeseed and rice bran, those are in fancy sit-down restaurants. And you can go to the fancy restaurant and order a steak that's going to be cooked with one of these 2 unhealthy oils, right? So these are the 8 that you need to memorize. These are the main reason unhealthy or junk food is bad for us. These are the main ingredients that put the junk in junk food. So, and it's not sugar. So you already highlighted the correlation between our seed oil consumption, seed oils in the food supply. This graph shows the seed oils present in the food supply, which will mirror consumption, of course. And the correlation between the seed oils and overweight and obesity is quite obvious. It's also the same correlation. I could substitute overweight and obesity with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, a metabolic disease. They're the same, right? And very importantly, what's not correlating here is carbohydrate. And what comes as a shock to most people is that, yes, sugar is part of this. Sugar is a carb. And while our sugar consumption has increased recently, compared to ancestrally, it hasn't really increased that much. So to take a look at this is the increase in sugar consumption, and our correlation between sugar consumption and diabetes is really poor, because this green line here is when our sugar started to explode way back in the 1820s, right? And then it kind of plateaued here for a while. And yes, it did increase again. And it does look like it correlates if you only look at like recent, if you only look at since 1960. But we didn't have type 2 diabetes. It wasn't like a very common disease. It was so rare that it was not even really taught about or characterized very well until 1960. So we were eating all this insane amount of more sugar, like this on, if you can't read these numbers, this is 0 pounds per year. We were eating 20, 40, 60, even 80 pounds of sugar per year. And, yes, it did increase between 1960 and the year 2000 from 80 pounds to almost 120 pounds. But what this graph doesn't show, because it's not a graph I created, I just added this little line here, but I didn't create this. What it doesn't show is that our consumption of sugar since the year 2000 really has dramatically dropped. It's continued to drop even further. So as our consumption of sugar is declining, our rates of disease of all kinds, including obesity and diabetes, is not declining. So there's a lack of correlation there, right? And everybody likes to repeat this thing. Oh, correlation isn't causation. Right, that's true. Correlation isn't causation. But if you don't even have a correlation, you probably don't have causation. It's like, I can't explain how you could have causation without correlation, right? If you're looking at a big enough time frame. So other things that don't correlate, of course, are the saturated fat-rich foods, like the butter and the lard. Even margarine consumption doesn't really correlate all that much, because margarine, which is full of trans fats, margarine consumption had gone down even as overweight and obesity was going up. So that's why I say seed oils put the junk in junk food. And just to drive home the point that I already raised about doctors completely being in the dark about what is junk food and what is processed food, look at this slide. I say what they don't want you to see here, like they being the processed food industry. So Milk Duds, that is obviously candy, it's junk food. But Similac is one of the most popular pediatrician recommended infant formulas. And I call it stealthy junk food. Why do I say this? Well, if you look at the top 3 ingredients, they're practically identical between Milk Duds and infant formula, something pediatricians would recommend. They get most of their calories from sugars and vegetable oils. The sugars are slightly different because it's going to be lactose sugar to mimic milk for the infant formula, and or table sugar plus corn syrup for Milk Duds. It's cheaper, so they use that for the Milk Duds. And then the vegetable oils are a little bit different too. Yeah,
I was going to say, I have a grandson, 2.5 years old, and when he was born, started having some problems with the formula. And I started looking at the ingredients of the different formulas. Definitely junk food, basically, because, high fructose corn syrup plus seed oils as the oil base, the healthy fat is some sort of seed oil. Usually I remember seeing soybean oil and canola oil in baby formula.
Yeah, it's an absolute travesty that this is what children are raised on. And what this does to these little babies is set them up for a life of medical issues, because these oils, when they are subjected to heat, I'm going to just go back to my slides, just since it's maybe more interesting than my face. Here, let's look at the toxins in 1 tablespoon of heated soy oil or corn oil. They're all the same, actually. So when you create like chips, or when you create any food that has to be baked, the oil is heated repeatedly, and that leads to the formation of numerous toxins. So this is what's in your junk food, right? This is why I say seed oils put the junk in junk food. Now, what does this have to do with babies and infant formula? Well, these exact same compounds can develop in our body cells when our diets are basically junk food, because we don't have, it's almost like we are promoting oxidation all the time when we don't eat a healthy diet. And what has oxidation got to do with it? Well, oxidation is how all of these toxins form, right? So soybeans are not particularly unhealthy, right? The fatty acids in soybeans are linoleic acid mostly, and alpha linolenic acid, and then some of the same fatty acid that's in olive oil, which is oleic acid. And when a person eats the soybean, there's not all these toxins in there, because these don't form until those polyunsaturates get oxidized. And so they can get oxidized outside of your body in a deep fryer, or in a factory where they're making junk food, or in a factory where they're making any kind of food that you're going to microwave it and reheat it. All of these things are going to be able to form when one of the ingredients is soy oil. But the problem is, when they're in our diet, then our bodies kind of become like very imbalanced in a way that promotes disease. And I have a slide to illustrate that too. So what happens, this is what drives all disease. So I'm showing you how the body gets out of balance with toxic inputs. And the kind of balance that is most correlated with all of these diseases is called redox imbalance. It has to do with oxidation versus non-oxidation. And what is oxidation? Well, oxidation is like burning. Fire is a kind of oxidation. Oxidation is oxygen reacting with stuff in a way that's bad, and usually bad. And so when our diet is not healthy, because we've got too many seed oils or other environmental toxins, or even emotional stress, or we don't exercise, we don't get enough sleep, then we get out of this redox balance state and develop imbalance. And that is called oxidative stress. It's a state of oxidative stress. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about how that leads to disease in a second. But this is like what happens, right? So our modern diet doesn't have enough of the antioxidants and the nutrients that we need to stay in redox balance. So we get out of balance and we're in a constant state of oxidative stress. And getting back to the infant formula is so low in nutrients that little babies that are raised on formula, well, study after study after study shows how bad these things are. No matter what you like are studying, formula-fed baby is going to have more of X disease, whatever it is, whether it's learning disorders or inflammatory disorders, or later in life, mental illness, whatever you look at, whether when they were formula fed, they're more likely to have it than if they were breastfed, right? And so the way some people interpret that, most people interpret that as, oh, well, breast milk is so superior, when of course it is, right? But the other side of that reality is that, well, it also is telling us that these seed oils are really potentially quite dangerous, because it is a fact that every study comparing infants on breast milk versus infant formula comes out really bad for infant formula. So that is a lot of real powerful evidence that these refined ingredients are setting us up for disease. So now I just want to show you what is oxidative stress. Well, just the idea here is that it's like having the Tasmanian devil in your membranes, right? Sort of related to the video that you opened with, where it shows how it was showing that lipid bilayer and that there was changes occurring within that lipid bilayer. When that happens, the cells don't function right. Well, the changes are driven by oxidative stress. It damages the cell membranes, it damages the mitochondria. And as a result, you get virtually any disease you can name. So I've just listed out immune function disorders like autoimmune disease, like celiac disease, like lupus, like any kind of food intolerance. Those are immune function disorders. Aging, age-related diseases, frailty, neurodegenerative diseases, any kind of gut inflammation, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, allergies. I mean, you name it. So that is the story of seed oils. And if you want to, maybe a lot of people have seen this meme circulating around on social media. Well, it came from my book, Dark Calories, because I publicized this as this is a fact that I came across during my research. And this is the quote that is directly from a peer-reviewed article published by a doctor who I'm now collaborating with on a bunch of research projects, who is one of the most well-respected scientists in the entire world. He's like in the top 2% of all influential scientists in the world. His name's Dr. Martin Grooteveld. And he himself said that one serving of fries has about the same amount of aldehyde toxins as you would get from smoking a cigarette, from smoking a pack of cigarettes, sorry. So one French fry, there's about 20, 25 fries in a pack of fries. Well, there's about 20 cigarettes in a pack of cigarettes. So it's a 1-to-1, right? So one French fry is like smoking one cigarette. And we give these fries to our kids. We eat these, right? We don't think we have a smoking habit. Well, if you have a bunch of fries, and the same could be said for fried chicken or potato chips and a lot of crackers and most of the snack foods out there. And doctors don't learn this. The American Heart Association claims that this is unfounded, right? They've been attacking me. I've been getting nasty emails from the American Heart Association, from representatives of them, trying to intimidate me and to stop telling people about these truths that they are essentially suppressing. They don't publish any of this information. They don't acknowledge that any of this is real. They always just say, "Oh, internet influencers, are making all this stuff up about seed oils being toxic," and that is not true. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. And I have a few other slides if we want to talk about celiac disease, but I think there was something else that you had questions about.
Well, I have a bunch of questions, and there are some questions posted here. So we're going to take the audience's questions, a couple of them at least. And I want to point out something I found some time ago relating to the Minnesota coronary experiment. I'm sure you're familiar because it was done with corn oil. And to make a long story short, lowered cholesterol. So this is the big claim of all these seed oils, right? They all lower cholesterol.
Right.
But I have seen similar studies. I point this out because it was a long time ago, 50 years is a long time. And the result was that, yes, it lowered cholesterol, but the group that had the corn oil had more strokes. So, it's probably not really beneficial if I can claim, oh, I lowered my cholesterol, but I have more of a risk of having a stroke.
Yes, exactly. And that is so important that you brought up that study, because that study actually went unpublished for decades because the results didn't come out the way they expected. They expected it to show a decrease in mortality. And in fact, it showed an increase in mortality. And it wasn't until Dr. Chris Ramsden at the National Institute of Health, who actually is a co-author on one of the latest dietary guidelines, which is a major wonderful thing. I mean, he should have been involved a long time ago. But it was his team that uncovered basically this massive cover up that when you give people oils that lower their cholesterol, it increases their mortality. And, the American Heart Association did their best to try and, debunk the credibility of this guy who's at the National Institute of Health and has almost like, he's basically angelic in terms of his conflicts of interest. And the American Heart Association, as maybe you don't know, but they get hundreds of millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical company, from the processed food industry. So, they have conflicts of interest, but this guy, Chris Ramsden, does not have like any that I know of. And most of the co-authors did not either.
Also, that study, and I'm sure you know this information, but for the audience, the principal investigator of that study doing the study removed his name, even though the study wasn't published before they decided not to publish. He removed his name from the whole thing. He washed his hands completely. And do you know? I'm sure you know who it was, right?
Yes, public enemy number one, Ancel Keys. And I call him public enemy number one because it was his big idea that cholesterol causes heart disease. And at the time, most doctors weren't ready to buy that, because there was no evidence. But he claimed that he had evidence. He claimed to physicians who he would meet and have, in the hallways, these kind of personal discussions with, he claimed that he had 5,000 heart attack cases that he'd studied, and he knew what they ate, and he knew that cholesterol had been the cause of high cholesterol had been their cause of heart attacks. And in my book, Dark Calories, I published what I found about that claim. That claim was an absolute flat out lie. At the time he was saying that, he had not even enrolled 5,000 people in any kind of a study, not to mention published or, had results to look at. He only had a handful of cases. And there's no evidence that he did a systematic review of their diets either, right? It's just, it was his opinion. It was truly his opinion. He was really good at creating the illusion of evidence and really good at argument, but he was not really good at presenting data because he didn't seem to have any.
Well, rumor has it, and I haven't delved much into this, but he ate fatty meat until he died. Anyways, let's take some of these questions.
Yeah, he describes actually his diet. Like he said, we only eat red meat for breakfast 3 days a week. And it was brisket. It was one of them, which is a fatty meat.
So ARX 9845, thank you for publishing everything we need to know about the horrific seed oils. Dr. Shanahan. This was a comment, but I thought I'd bring it up. All right.
Thank you. You're welcome.
All right.
I saw a question that came through early, Dr. Nelson. Mm-hmm. It was about fermented plant foods being good for gut integrity.
I believe I have it. Hold on a second. Do you have, Brian Airy, do you have pushback? And I think you mentioned several times that it was hard to get a publisher.
Oh, for my books. Yeah. So actually, no, it wasn't super hard to get a publisher for books. What's hard to get published is academic papers because they require a university appointment, which I only recently got a university appointment. So I was kind of like, even though my books were very well, backed with scientific evidence that was all peer reviewed, that was the only way I could get my side of the story out, or my ideas out, right? Was with a publisher. And I guess it was a little tricky in the beginning because I didn't have, nobody knew who I was. I was living on the island of Kauai and in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in 2004. When I started writing the book, there was like no Google, I don't think, at that time. And Amazon didn't even deliver books to Hawaii. Like there was no way to get the word out. And so I was in the middle of nowhere. And really the book only took off after a filmmaker named Jeff Hayes who had read it, started basically promoting it on his own, like out of the goodness of his heart. And thanks to this filmmaker, Jeff Hayes, my self-published book went up to like the top 10 on all of Amazon for a sustained period. And we sold like hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of copies, which was amazing. So I'm forever grateful to Jeff Hayes. And then once that happened and I got hooked up with the Los Angeles Lakers, then it was, the publishers were much more interested in me. In fact, I had agents who really helped the publishers get extremely interested.
Right. So this is the next question, and it's the one you had seen. Carnivore Teacher Alpha, by the way, he does have a book on oils. Dr. Shanahan, you mentioned that fermented plant foods are a pillar to good gut integrity and health. In your expert opinion, are these fermented plants essential for all of us to consume?
Yeah, I would say that, especially if you have gut problems, I recommend them to all of my patients that I work with. And, so I know in the carnivore community, you must have questions about like plants, right? So how could they be good? Well, first of all, any anti-nutrients that a plant might have can be at least partly mitigated by the bacteria that are acting on the food. And because all plants have anti-nutrients, right? And interestingly, though, the anti-nutrients aren't so much for protection against herbivores or mammals or anything with a liver that can metabolize these anti-nutrients. They are protection against insects, because plants and insects have a much longer relationship going back hundreds of millions of years than plants, compared to plants and mammals, which have a very recent relationship, just a few millions of years. And mammals, we have livers. So the anti-nutrients in plants don't hurt. That's how deer and stuff like this is. It's their liver that can metabolize all of this stuff. And of course, they also, the herbivores, they also have massive guts where a lot of fermentation takes place. So we can mitigate any kind of anti-nutrients in plants. So I just wanted to bring that up. And then the other part of it is that we've selected for plants that have way fewer anti-nutrients than the original, right? Like, so, broccoli, that came actually from a plant in the mustard family. And yeah, the original had a lot more toxicity in its leaves. It didn't look anything like broccoli. It didn't have broccoli on it. So we've bred it for thousands of years to the point where it's way more easily digestible by our human guts, even if we don't ferment it. But then when you take something like, kale or cabbage, which is fermented into cabbage, all kinds of cabbages. There's Asian cabbages, which are fermented into kimchi, and European, which are fermented into sauerkraut. What you do when you're fermenting is you are allowing just the microbes. Originally, they were just microbes that in the environment would flourish on the leaves of cabbages. When you put salt in there, it would draw out some water. Then that would allow certain microbes to come in and start developing. And then another set of microbes would come in and start developing. And it would change the character of the nutrients that are available. And you would get so much more vitamins, especially certain types of vitamin K. And when there are any anti-nutrients in there, of course, they can be metabolized. So it's a completely different thing. And then when you consume it live, when you eat kimchi or sauerkraut, that is a live culture ferment that you haven't cooked. So those microbes are still alive. Then you're eating probiotics, right? So you're eating, these basically people now are going around supplementing with all kinds of probiotics. And I don't think that they are going to be anywhere near as beneficial to them as if they would just eat some fermented pickles or fermented sauerkraut or dairy products like fermented dairy. You ferment dairy into yogurt, you ferment it into kefir. These are live culture ferments as opposed to cheese, which was fermented, but then there's nothing living in them anymore because it's too dried up. But all of those beneficial bacteria, well, they help your microbiome, right? They are the good guys in there. And so when you have all these good guys in your gut, the good guys can fight off the bad guys, the pathogens. So it just has such like a spiraling, snowballing effect of benefits to consume these things that in all traditional cultures that have been studied, in the past 100 years, have this common element that they ferment foods. It's not always plant foods. They also will ferment, fish too, and especially
and
other meats.
If you're gonna eat plants, obviously you need to eat. It's probably better to not eat raw. Although I have a very good friend who she insists that it's better raw, but it is the same friend that used to be vegetarian until a couple of months ago, and he has now started eating meat. Anyways, Carnivore teacher Alpha, who is John Laspina is his name, clarified a comment I made. His book on Cetos is not out yet, but he's working on it. All right. So let's take another question here. So, what are your thoughts about red light therapy to unclog mitochondria?
Well, red light is not going to penetrate very deep into your skin. So I'm not sure it's going to do very much.
Okay.
Good question, though, because a lot of people are talking about that.
And if you have any more questions, please put them in the chat. And after this question, one of the things that popped into my mind right now when you were talking about the fermentation was oxalates and seed oil. So hold that thought. And this is a question from Karen, Faith Focused Food Freedom. Are you able in your family practice to teach your patients about nutrition? And if so, how do they respond? Because you can give people all the best information and they don't want to take it.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Yeah. So you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, obviously. So what happened was when I was practicing on Kauai, once I started talking about diet and nutrition to my patients, it became known throughout the island that I would help people with diet. And so people self-selected to come to me. And so they were very interested already, and they would do whatever I said, and they did whatever I said. And it was amazing for them, right? People to this day, actually, just not long ago, I got an email from somebody who is now in his late 80s, who was, my patient when he was in his 60s. He reversed his diabetes. His wife reversed her autoimmune diseases, and they are thriving in their 80s. So people love it. But honestly, I didn't love it, because what I didn't love about it, I love the fact that it was helping people, but I did not have the ability to work within the insurance system to give them all the information they were asking me. They were asking me so many questions. It would have taken hours, right? And they would happily stay for hours, but I couldn't do that. So it became a huge stress for me. I would have this waiting room full of people, and I couldn't help them all. And there was just no way to accommodate all of that in the medical system. So that's why I started writing books. And now I have a class where I am actually teaching people exactly what they need to do and how to make these habit changes step by step, and what positive things to look for happening in their body so that they can know that it is working. Because if you don't give somebody any idea what is supposed to happen so that they can know that they are experiencing benefits, then they're not going to, how would they know? Right. And so I teach them what to expect, and I teach them what labs to track, and I teach them how to organize their life basically around with food as a priority. And it doesn't mean like doing hours of meal prep every weekend like that. I specifically don't want people to have to do that, because I don't do that myself. I don't. If you could do that, more power to you, but I don't have the patience for that. So I just teach people the habits that I've developed and that I've learned from other of my patients in this 8-week course. It's called the Energy First Approach to Health. And if anyone is interested, you can sign up for my newsletter, because the next time, go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, because I already launched it, and I'm going to launch it again later this year. It goes for 8 weeks. And then I take a little
and
break.
Her website is very easy to remember. It's Dr. Cate with a C, drcate.com, right?
Thank you.
This is your website. Go there, sign up for the newsletter, look around for the course. And all right. So quickly, because I do have 2 questions I want to cover before we finish. And we only have about 2 more minutes. All right. So any relation, any interaction between the seed oils and oxalates?
Yes. So what happens is the oxidative stress promotes a state where your body cannot eliminate the molecule that becomes uric acid. I'm sorry, that becomes
Oxalic acid.
Yes, oxalic acid. So oxalic acid builds up in your body when your body is subjected to too much oxidative stress. And it's just a problem for people who have the damage done by seed oils. Otherwise, most of us can metabolize oxalates very well, especially if we drink a decent amount of water. So seed oils are the predisposing factor to a lot of these intolerances that develop from plants that, improve when you avoid plants, but it would also improve by avoiding seed oils.
All right. One last question, and we have about 15 seconds for you to answer this. Specifically, grapeseed oil.
Grapeseed or rapeseed?
Grape with a G. Sorry about my accent. I had a stroke in 2018, and I developed a Spanish accent.
Grapeseed oil is one of the hateful 8, so we should avoid it.
Yeah. Now, the seed oils are mostly omega-6 fatty acids, right?
That is correct. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And omega-6 fatty acids are essential fatty acids.
Correct.
So, I'm being sarcastic in what I'm partly my question, but just because they're omega-6 fatty acids doesn't mean they're not easily oxidized, right? And
that's right.
I guess that's one of the big problems. Anyways, can you expand just a little bit more on either grapeseed oil or canola oil? We didn't speak much about the canola oil, but
well, both of them are refined and high in polyunsaturates, and the combination of being refined and high in polyunsaturates means that they develop that whole sheet of toxins that I showed you earlier. Mm-hmm. When you cook with them, when they're heated, and even if they just sit around too long, like even if it's just salad dressing, you shake it up, you put more air in there, it's going to oxidize. So you think, well, okay, not carnivore people, but people think they're eating a healthy salad, but they're pouring all these toxins all over it. That's not going to be good for anything.
Yeah. All right. One more time, if someone wants to talk to you, contact you in any way, what's the best way to do that?
Please visit my website, which is drcate.com, and sign up for my newsletter so that you can see what I'm doing. And also when you sign up for my newsletter, you learn a little bit about the different books that I've written, so you can decide if you might want any of those to help understand, what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. And also you learn about how I work with people one-on-one, with consultations that I do by telehealth, and the course that I've created.
All right. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be at 5:30 within the Kilz Tribe community. If you're a member, come and join us. You have a good day.